Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is an episode of It Came From the Network. On this episode, we're going to review Starrcade 1990 from WCW. And this was recommended from our good friend, Steve Tatanani. Now, if you haven't seen It Came From the Network before, basically we review the weird, the wacky, the campy, and just sometimes downright bad stuff that you could find on the WWE Network. Somewhat of a tribute to Mystery Science Theater 3000. Let's jump right into Starrcade 90. The first match of the night, Beautiful Bobby Eaton versus the Z-Man. Decent opener. Eaton picks up the win, gets some crowd hyped, nice little quick match. Fun to build on. Next up, we have the first of 4 semifinal matches, which are for the Pat O'Connor Tag Team Tournament trophy. And basically, it was tag teams from all over the world. First match, we have Sergeant Kruger, and Colonel DeClerc from South America versus Rick and Scott Steiner from America. Kruger and DeClerc, I butchered their names badly. I butchered their country too. They're from South Africa. This was a quick match, about 2 minutes long. The Steiners pick up the easy win, move on to the next round. Next we have from England, gentlemen Chris Adams and Norman Smiley, which is an awesome team in my opinion, versus Conan and Rey Mysterio. Now, this isn't 619 Rey Mysterio that you know from WWE. This is his uncle, the original Rey Mysterio. This was probably the longest of this round of tag matches. A decent match, 2 decent teams. I found it funny that during the match, they called Mysterio, Mysterioso, and Mysteric, which was kind of weird. But it was a cool match. Conan was still wearing his mask at this point. Smiley hadn't become the guy with the big wiggle yet. Chris Adams, this was a little bit after his world-class run, so he was probably the most known of the 4 in America. The Mexican contingent of Conan and Mysterio pick up the win. Decent match. We see Mysterio get injured in a plancha after the match, which we'll play into a later tag match. Next up we have from New Zealand, Rick Morgan and Jacko Victory versus from Japan, Mr. Saito and the Great Muta. Again, this was about a 4-minute match, which most of these first round matches were. Saito and Muta pick up the pin. They're billed as the 2nd seed. The Steiners were billed as the 1st seed. As you can see, the seeds are already being planted for the finals. Next up we have from Japan, Bull Johnson, or not from Japan, I'm sorry, from Canada, Bull Johnson and Troy Montour, not to be confused with Troy McClure or Mantar, but Troy Montour versus Victor Zangief and Solomon Hashimokov. I know I butchered that, and they're representing Russia or the USSR, Soviet Union at the time. From here on out, we're going to call them the Russian team. Russian team picks up the win on this to move on. Again, another quick 2-3 minute match. So that's the end of that first round. Next up, we go into a singles match. We got Terry Taylor, formerly known as the Red Rooster, going up against Michael Wallstreet, formerly known as Mike Rotundo, soon to be known as IRS after this. Michael Wallstreet had an interesting gimmick. His gimmick was he had Alexandra York, who would go on to become Marlena, and basically she would use a computer to determine how fast he could win his match and the strategy for the match. She would print out a spreadsheet. Kind of cutting edge stuff for the early 90s. This is exactly what people thought computers would be used for, to make something like this, a spreadsheet that would tell you how to win, kind of like people were using computer programs for chess strategies, for football strategies, all kinds of fun stuff back then. And it carried over into this. I believe the time was 8 minutes and 50-something seconds. They said he would win within. Of course, Michael Wall Street does when Terry Taylor makes a mistake. Picks up the win, proving the computer age is correct. Next up, we have yet another tag match. Now, along with the tag tournament, we had an abundance of other tag matches on this card. I believe the card's 14 matches, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 out of the 14 matches on the card are tag matches, including the tag tournament, which is really weird if you think about it in today's terms. There's not 14 tag teams that would be on a tag team tournament. At the most, you get 5 or 6 in the WWE, and then some thrown together tag teams, and they would never do an international tournament and bring guys in from other parts. But this was WCW. This was stuff they were known to do. They were still tied to the NWA. So NWA had ties to all these countries. They could bring these guys in and do this kind of thing. But anyway, this was not a tag tournament match. This was the Motor City Madman and the Big Cat, who would go on to become Mr. Hughes, versus Sid Vicious and Dan Spivey, a.k.a. the Skyscrapers. Skyscrapers pick up a squash win in about, I would say, about a minute with a double-team powerbomb. Afterwards, they do an awkward interview where they hold up Paulie Dangerously, yes, the guy that would become Paul Heyman, and say the Skyscrapers, it wasn't a one-off, they're back and they'll do damage to whoever they want to. The interview lasted longer than the match, which a lot of these matches were only 2-3 minutes. I'll speak of that when I get to the end, and then the critique of the whole show. Next up, we have another tag match that had nothing to do with the tournament. Tommy Wildfire Rich and Ricky Morton versus the Freebirds of Michael P.S. Hayes and Jimmy Jam Garvin. The reason for Rich being in this is because Robert Gibson was injured by the Freebirds. Freebirds come out, and interestingly enough, for the time frame and how much time has changed since then, they had their faces painted with the Confederate flag. Something like that would never fly today. As you can see, I kind of have one on my Briscoe Brothers shirt, a little bit of a Confederate flag insignia, which is kind of borderline. Something like that you could never get away with in the PG era. Interesting how looking back at something like that, you realize how silly and stupid it is that people take so much offense to it. Now, and I understand there's a lot to be offended by it. I don't want to get into a political debate about this, but for how many years was it just something that Southern people wore? I'm not even a Southerner. It doesn't offend me at all. Some people it does. But anyway, I digress. I'm going off too far on a tangent. Decent match. Richard and Morton pick up the win. Afterwards, the Freebirds blame it on Sir Richard Marley, who was Little Richard Marley, who was their second at the time, who was actually preliminary wrestler Rocky King. They get in a little scuffle with him. Rich and Morton make the save, which leads to the Freebirds getting their hands on Gibson and giving him a double clothesline on the ramp. If you guys remember the cool WCW ramp that would go all the way from the entrance to the ring and would walk you right on the ring apron, I thought that was cool. I also liked when ECW would do the same thing. I thought it gave it a big fight feeling. It made it seem like something more important. Anyway, Rich and Morton pick up the win, rolls us right into the next round of our Pat O'Connor tag tournament. I guess you would say, well, the first round was the quarterfinals. This would be the semifinals. I said it backwards. We have the Mexican team, Conan and Mysterio, Rey Mysterio Sr., I guess, versus Steiner Brothers. Steiner Brothers pick up a quick win. They play on the fact that both Conan and Mysterio were injured. Conan went into the tournament with an injury, and Mysterio got injured by the plancha he attempted. Steiners pick up a quick win, sets them to the finals. Next up, we have the USSR Russian contingent of the two guys' names I have trouble pronouncing versus the Great Muta and Mr. Saito. Muta and Saito pick up the win. Sets up the match that everybody knew that was going to happen going into it. Muta and Saito versus Steiners for later on in the finals of the Pat O'Connor Tag Tournament. Next up, we have a match for the United States Championship. Lex Luger versus Stan the Lariat Hansen in a Texas Lariat match. Now, just so everybody knows, it's basically just a bull rope match. Their arms are tied together. You have to touch all four corners. It's what it is. They just called it a Texas Lariat match, I guess, because of Stan Hansen. Pretty solid match, I would say. Fun match. Luger does well in brawling matches. He picks up the win. There's a little bit of controversy because as he touched the fourth corner, the referee went down. A different ref came out, but the original ref came back and said he seen Luger touching. Just a weird schmoz. Luger picks up the win, wins the U.S. title from Hansen. Good match overall. Next up, we have the Four Horsemen contingent of Arn Anderson and Barry Windham, who was replacing Ric Flair, who was injured, versus Doom in a street fight. This was a good match, good back and forth. The only thing that I thought kind of sucked was the end of the match. You got four good brawlers here. Arn Anderson, Barry Windham, Ron Simmons, and Butch Reed, all good brawling style wrestlers. At the end, we see a double pin where I believe Anderson pinned Simmons and Butch Reed pinned Windham at the same time. So we basically get a schmoz, so the feud keeps going. And they keep continuing on. But it was a fun match, interesting, cool little street fight. One of the better matches on the card. You know, awesome guys all the way around. Next up, we have the finals of the Pat O'Connor Tag Team Tournament. Mr. Saito and the Great Muta versus Steiner Brothers. A decent match. This match was given about 10 minutes time to go. They put on what they could in the time frame. This was when the Steiners were really at the peak, probably one of the 2 or 3 best tag teams in the world. Somewhere between them and Doc and Gordy hadn't quite came together yet, but the Steiners were right up there, considered one of the best tag teams in the world at this time. And great working tag team. Saito and Muta, I'm not sure exactly how much they tagged with each other, but they worked well with each other. I understood it was something that was kind of thrown together so you knew who the two guys were. Muta had his runs already in America, and so had Saito, so it made sense. And this was a good match. Steiners pick up the win the Pat O'Connor Memorial Tag Tournament, or Tag Tournament, whatever you want to call it. Last but not least, we have our main event. A steel cage match, months and months in the making. Sting versus the mysterious Black Scorpion. For months, the Black Scorpion tortured Sting, said some cryptic messages of who he could possibly be. He's someone from Sting's past that has a vendetta against him. So they put in a cage. If the Scorpion wins, he gets the WCW Championship. If Sting wins, he gets to unmask the Scorpion. See a solid match. First off, 4 Scorpions come down. We find they're just messengers, and somewhat of a UFO comes down, opens up, and the actual Black Scorpion comes out for the match. But Sting wrestling the Scorpion in probably the best match of the night. Solid match all around. Now, I know there's a lot of detractors to this whole angle and how it played out. At the time of the Black Scorpion angle, I was really into it. I was 13 years old. I really enjoyed what was going on with it. I really enjoyed the mystery. I thought it was going to lead to be somebody else, but it really didn't. But even with that, I'll explain the reveal in a second. I thought it was a fun storyline. Looking back, is it hokey? Is it cheesy? Yeah, it is. But still, at the time, I was really into it. I was really into the push for Sting. I was really into the mystery of who the Black Scorpion could possibly be. And there was always questions. Was it the Ultimate Warrior? Was it You know, one of his early tag team partners like Eddie Gilbert? Was it Rick Steiner? Was it the Angel of Death, who it was rumored to be, that I didn't know till later on? But there was all kinds of guys that it could have potentially been, and it ended up being Ric Flair. Which, don't get me wrong, Ric Flair is awesome, but it was kind of a letdown because you were kind of looking for a new opponent and a new guy to go up against Sting. Even the Great Muta was someone that was mentioned it could have been. You were looking for that new challenger, and Ric Flair, as great as Ric Flair is, the greatest wrestler of all time, it kind of was like, okay, so we've seen this before. We've seen Ric Flair and Sting. We want something new. But, alas, that's what it is. It ended up being Flair. We find out after the match when Wyndham and Anderson come down, start attacking Sting. Sting finally gets the upper hand, unmasks Flair. Flair is the Black Scorpion. But overall, 14 matches. My overall view of it, the tournament could have went a little better. I think they should have took the first round and put it on Saturday night, or WCW Saturday night at the time. Even could have done it over a month and just had the second and third final round. Gave the matches a little bit more time to make them more interesting. Weeded out some of the wrestlers we don't really know that never really wrestled in America, and I don't know much of guys like Sergeant Kruger and Colonel DeClerc. Don't know much about them. Don't have an interest in them. Adams and Smiley, I knew who gentleman Chris Adams was. At the time, Norman Smiley was new to me. Made sense. I enjoyed that. Conan and Mysterio. That made a lot of sense because there's a lot of people that like Lucha Libre. Rick Morgan and Jacko Victory, we know who they were. Saito and Muta, we know who they were. Bull Johnson and Troy Montour from Canada, no clue who either one of them were. This is probably the first and only time I've seen a match with them. As well as Victor Zangief and Solomon Hashimoto, which, again, you could have weeded those guys out that nobody knew and got no response from the crowd and got it to where you needed, to the Final Four with Conan and Mysterio versus Steiners. And I would have changed took out the USSR team versus Muta and Saito and made the Rip Morgan and Jacko Victory two known talents in it, and just put those two matches in the finals in, gave everything a little bit more time. But I understand what WCW was going for. Car Crash at the time, fast-paced, quick matches, get you in and out, get your interest jacked. It's not the same. It's hard watching this now, 2016, with the mentality of match pacing and structure as it was 1990, where the squash match was still a very acceptable method, even on a pay-per-view. But all in all, not a horrible pay-per-view, a lot of fun characters. Sting, the Black Scorpion, the Steiner brothers at their absolute peak, Doom, the Horsemen, Anderson and Wyndham. I always loved Barry Windham. Stan, Larry Hansen, Great Muta, Mr. Saito, Conan, an early Conan, Rey Mysterio Sr., the Freebirds, Tommy Rich and Richard Morton, Michael Wall Street, Terry Taylor. Some great talent. Chris Adams and Norman Smiley, Bobby Eaton. All the way up and down, we had some fun, interesting matches. The brevity of the matches kind of helped a little bit on with the pacing. It helped, get some of these 80s style lumbering guys and move them out of the way. It kept everything moving, kept everything fun. This is actually, to me, it was a very fun pay-per-view. Like I said, I look back more fondly on the Black Scorpion than a lot of people do. I remember as a 13-year-old boy really enjoying it, except for Ric Flair. And again, I love Ric Flair. He's one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. I just wish they would have brought somebody else in. And not understanding how the world worked at the time, I thought it was going to be the Ultimate Warrior, because you read in all the actor mags how Sting and the Ultimate Warrior were a tag team. And then my backup was, I honestly thought it was, when I was sitting back and I remember, I said, it's the Ultimate Warrior. If it's not him, it's Eddie Gilbert, who brought Sting into Hudman Hot Stuff Incorporated in UWF. If it's not him, it's Rick Steiner, who Sting tagged with. If it's not him, it's the Great Muta, who Sting had a running feud with. Or it's somebody I don't know. And this is what was making me excited. I didn't think it was going to be Flair for the reason as we've seen Sting and Flair already, and we would continue to see Sting and Flair. And do not get me wrong, anytime you put Sting and Flair in a ring together, it was a great match. I just wanted something different from the review. Now, on to rating of the show. We have a 1 to 5 scale here, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. 1 is a gobbledygooker, 2 is a renegade, 3 is a Hurricane Helms, 4 is a Goldust, 5 is a Kane. Gave this show a 4, a Goldust. Again, it was very fun, a lot of very cool characters, a lot of guys you see on here that are either in the WWE Hall of Fame, or should be in the WWE Hall of Fame, or will soon be in the WWE Hall of Fame. Just a great, interesting card, interesting time capsule of 1990 in WCW, an era of change. I thought it was a fun show. I enjoyed it. I would watch it again, and I recommend you watching it too. And again, thank you to our friend Steve Tattanani, who recommended this show. I would advise to go ahead, if you'd like to recommend something as well, go ahead and do so. We have a couple recommendations from our last show, so we're backlogged a bit. We're going to have to catch up with them. But if you want to recommend something, I will put it on my list, and it will be something to do for us to review here. Just preference, it has to be able to be found on the WWE Network. But basically, that's all I have to say about this. This show's a 4, a Goldust, solid show all the way around. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun watching and reminiscing. That's all I have to say about that. My name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of It Came From the Network.